There are moments in life when everything you thought was solid beneath your feet simply disappears, when the world you knew transforms into something unrecognizable, when the people you trusted most become strangers wearing familiar faces. I am standing here today to tell you about the day I came home from 6 months in the intensive care unit, my body weak but my spirit grateful to be alive, only to discover that home no longer existed, that my own son had erased me from existence, reported me dead to the world, and sold the house where I raised him, where every corner held memories of birthday parties and scraped knees and goodnight kisses. The key trembled in my hand as I tried to fit it into the lock that afternoon. The same key I had carried for 37 years, the key that had opened this door on Christmas mornings and ordinary Tuesdays, and the night I brought my baby boy home from the hospital, and it would not turn. It would not work. It felt foreign in the lock, as if the house itself was rejecting me, telling me I did not belong there anymore. You need to understand something before I continue with this story, something about what it feels like to be invisible, to be discarded, to realize that your own child looked at your hospital bed and saw not a mother fighting to survive, but an inconvenience to be eliminated from paperwork and property records. If you are watching this right now and you have ever felt forgotten by the people who should remember you most, if you have ever been treated as less than human by someone you gave everything to, if you have ever stood outside a locked door wondering how your life became unrecognizable, then you know exactly the hollow ache that consumed me as I stood on that porch, bags in hand, staring at a lock that no longer recognized my key. This is not just my story. This is the story of every person who has been made to feel disposable, every parent who sacrificed everything only to be abandoned when they became difficult or expensive or inconvenient. And I am telling you this today because I want you to know that you are not alone in this pain, that your experience matters, that what happened to you was real and wrong and you deserved better. Before I tell you what I discovered when that key failed to open my own front door, before I share with you the devastating truth about what my son had done while I fought for my life in that hospital bed, I want to invite you to become part of this community we are building here, a place where your story matters, where your pain is acknowledged, where you will find others who understand exactly what it feels like to be betrayed by the people who should protect you. If you subscribe to this channel right now, you are not just clicking a button, you are joining a family of people who refuse to let their experiences be silenced, who find strength in sharing their truth, who know that speaking about these painful moments is how we heal together. Every week I share stories like this one, stories that might break your heart, but will also remind you that you are stronger than you know, that survival is possible, that you are not walking this difficult road alone. So please, take a moment right now and subscribe, because this community needs your voice, your experience, your presence, and I promise you that every video I create is for people like us, people who have been through the unthinkable and are still standing, still searching for understanding, still believing that our stories deserve to be heard. The key would not turn, and my hands were shaking, not just from the weakness that 6 months in intensive care leaves in your bones, but from a fear that was growing in my chest like ice water spreading through my veins. I rang the doorbell, my own doorbell, and waited like a stranger seeking entry to a place I no longer belonged. The door opened, and a young woman stood there, maybe 30 years old, holding a baby on her hip, and she looked at me with the polite confusion you reserve for door-to-door salespeople or lost travelers asking for directions. "I am sorry," she said, and her voice was kind but firm, the voice of someone who owned this space and had every right to decide who entered it. "Can I help you?" Those 3 words, "Can I help you?" spoken at the threshold of my own home, the home where I had nursed my son through chickenpox and helped him with algebra homework and taught him how to tie his shoes, those words shattered something inside me that I did not know could break any further after everything the hospital had already taken from me. "I live here," I told her, and even as the words left my mouth, I could hear how absurd they sounded, how impossible, because clearly she lived here. Her furniture was visible behind her in the living room. Her family photos were on the walls where mine used to hang. Her life had replaced mine so completely that my claim sounded like the confused rambling of someone lost in their own mind. She looked at me with a mixture of concern and discomfort, the way you might look at someone experiencing a mental health crisis, someone who needed help, but not the kind of help she could provide. "I am sorry," she repeated, and I could see her hand tightening on the door, preparing to close it gently but firmly in my face. "You must be confused. This is my house. We bought it 6 months ago. My husband and I closed on it in March. Perhaps you are thinking of a different address? 6 months ago. March. The same month I was admitted to the intensive care unit with pneumonia that turned into sepsis. The same month I spent in a medically induced coma while machines breathed for me, and my organs failed one by one, and the doctors told my son, my only child, that he should prepare himself because his mother might not make it through the night. I stood there on the porch, my legs threatening to give out beneath me, my mind racing to make sense of information that could not possibly be true, and I heard myself asking in a voice that did not sound like my own, "Who did you buy it from?" The woman shifted the baby to her other hip, and I could see she was trying to decide whether to answer me or simply close the door and call someone, maybe the police, maybe Adult Protective Services, maybe anyone who could remove this confused old woman from her property. "A man named David Thompson," she said finally. "He said it was his mother's house, but she had passed away and he needed to sell it quickly to settle the estate. He was very nice, very professional, gave us a good price because he wanted to close fast. David Thompson, my son, my boy, the child I carried for 9 months and pushed into this world after 18 hours of labor, the baby I nursed and rocked and sang to sleep every night for years, the toddler who used to bring me dandelions from the yard like they were precious bouquets, the teenager who promised he would always take care of me when I got old, the man who stood at his father's funeral and held my hand and swore he would never let anything happen to me. That David Thompson had sold my house while I was fighting for my life in intensive care. That David Thompson had told these people, these kind young strangers who thought they were buying property from a grieving son, that his mother was dead, that I was dead, that I no longer existed anywhere except in past tense and estate paperwork. I must have made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob, because the woman's expression changed from wariness to genuine concern. "Are you okay? Do you need me to call someone for you?" And what could I say to that? How could I explain that I needed her to call my son, except my son was the one who had done this to me, who had erased me from existence while I lay unconscious and vulnerable and completely dependent on others to advocate for my survival? I backed away from the door, mumbling apologies I did not owe, and I heard the door close softly behind me as I stumbled down the porch steps, the same steps I had climbed thousands of times carrying groceries and laundry and hope for the future, except now they belonged to someone else's story, someone else's life, and I was just a confused old woman who did not understand that she had been deleted from the world she used to inhabit. I sat in my car for a long time, the car that David had said was in the shop being repaired while I was in the hospital, the car I had to retrieve from an impound lot just that morning after a nurse helped me track it down through abandoned vehicle records. My phone was dead because the charger had broken months ago, and David never brought me a new one despite my repeated requests during the brief moments of consciousness I had between procedures and medication adjustments. I had nowhere to go. The house was gone. My belongings, everything I owned, the photo albums documenting 68 years of life, my mother's jewelry that I planned to pass down to my future grandchildren, my father's war medals, my wedding dress preserved in a box in the attic, the quilt my grandmother made me when I graduated from college, all of it was gone, sold to strangers, or thrown away, or kept by my son as spoils of war against a mother who had the audacity to survive when he had already planned her funeral. The checking account I tried to access that morning was closed. The savings account I had built over decades of careful budgeting and sacrifice showed a balance of 0, cleaned out months ago by someone with power of attorney privileges that I had granted my son years earlier when his father died. And I wanted to make sure someone could handle my affairs if I ever became incapacitated. I had been incapacitated, technically, medically incapacitated while machines kept me alive, and doctors performed procedures I could not consent to because I was not conscious to give consent, and my son had used that incapacity to steal everything, to erase me, to build a new reality in which his mother was dead, and he was free to do whatever he wanted with her possessions, her property, her entire existence. I want to pause here and ask you something, and I want you to really think about this question before you scroll past it, before you move on to the next video or the next distraction, because this matters. Your answer matters. Your experience matters to everyone else who is watching this right now and feeling that same knot of recognition in their stomach. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Have you ever discovered that the person you loved most in this world saw you as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome or an asset to liquidate? If the answer is yes, If you know what it feels like to have your world dismantled by someone who was supposed to protect it, I want you to do something for me right now. I want you to scroll down to the comments and type these exact words. I survived the unthinkable. That is all you need to write. I survived the unthinkable. 4 simple words that tell everyone else reading this that they are not alone, that you understand their pain because you have lived it too, that this community is real and we are here for each other even when our own families abandon us. Do it right now. Type those words in the comments. Let your voice be counted. Let someone else who is struggling see your words and know that survival is possible, that they can make it through this darkness just like you did, just like I am doing right now as I tell you this story. Your comment might be exactly what someone needs to see today to keep going, to not give up, to believe that there is life after betrayal. So please, take 10 seconds and type it. I survived the unthinkable. I drove to David's house, the house he bought 3 years ago in the nice suburb with the good schools, even though he and his wife had no children, the house with the 3-car garage and the swimming pool and the kitchen that cost more than most people's annual salary. I parked on the street and I walked up to the front door and I rang the bell. And when my son opened the door and saw me standing there, very much alive, very much not dead as he had claimed to the people who bought my house and the bank that closed my accounts and whoever else he had told that convenient lie to, his face went through a series of expressions I will never forget. First, there was shock, genuine surprise that I was standing there, as if he truly believed I would die in that hospital and save him the trouble of having to face me again. Then came fear, a flash of panic as he realized that all his careful planning, all his theft and fraud and lies, were about to be exposed. And finally, settling over his features like a mask, came anger, cold and hard, and directed at me for having the audacity to survive, for ruining whatever plans he had made with my money and my property and my erased existence. "Mom," he said, and the words sounded strange coming from his mouth, like he was trying on a role he no longer wanted to play. "What are you doing here?" And I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of that question. What are you doing here? As if I was the one who needed to explain my presence. As if I was the one who had done something wrong by not dying when it would have been more convenient for him. "I could not go home," I told him, my voice surprisingly steady considering the earthquake happening inside my chest. "The key did not work. There is a family living in my house. They said they bought it from you. They said you told them I was dead." He did not even have the decency to look ashamed. He crossed his arms and leaned against the door frame, and he looked at me the way you might look at a problem you thought you had solved, but had inexplicably reappeared to complicate your life again. "You were dying," he said, as if that explained everything, as if my near death gave him permission to steal my entire life. "The doctor said you probably would not make it. I had to make decisions. I had bills to pay. Your medical expenses were piling up and someone had to deal with the house and the accounts and all of it, and you were not exactly in a position to handle things yourself." I stared at my son, this stranger wearing my child's face, and I tried to find somewhere in his words or his expression any hint of remorse, any acknowledgement that what he had done was wrong, that selling your mother's house and stealing her money while she fights for her life in a hospital bed might be, at the very least, morally questionable. But there was nothing. He genuinely believed he was justified, that my illness had given him the right to take everything, that my survival was somehow an inconvenience to him rather than a miracle to celebrate. "I am not dead," I said, and I heard my voice breaking on those 3 words, cracking under the weight of everything they meant. "I am not dead, David. I am standing right here. I survived, and now I have nothing. No house, no money, nowhere to go. What did you think was going to happen when I got out of the hospital? Did you think I would just disappear? Did you think I would die quietly and save you the embarrassment of having to explain why you stole from your own mother?" He sighed, actually sighed, like I was being unreasonable, like I was the problem in this scenario. "You can stay in a hotel for a few days," he said. "I will give you some money to get settled, but you cannot stay here. Jennifer would not understand, and we have our own life now, our own plans, and I cannot have you complicating things." Jennifer, his wife, the woman who had never particularly liked me even before I got sick, who saw me as an obligation rather than family, who probably celebrated when David told her I was gone, and they could finally live their lives without the burden of an aging mother-in-law who might eventually need care or support or basic human decency. "I cannot have you complicating things. My son, my only child, the boy I raised alone after his father died, the man I worked double shifts to put through college, the the person I loved more than my own life, was telling me that my existence complicated his plans, that asking him for help after he had stolen everything from me was an unreasonable request, that I should simply disappear quietly into a hotel room and not make a fuss about the fact that he had committed fraud and theft and told the world his mother was dead. Something shifted in me in that moment, something fundamental and irreversible. I had spent my whole life making myself smaller for other people, accommodating their needs, sacrificing my wants and dreams and comfort so that others could have easier lives. I worked 2 jobs to keep David in private school when public school would have been good enough. I postponed my own education and career advancement to be available when he needed me. I forgave him for missing my birthday year after year because he was busy with work or friends or anything else that mattered more than showing up for his mother. I excused his wife's coldness and his increasingly rare phone calls and his impatience whenever I asked for help with something simple like changing a light bulb or understanding a new medication. I had made myself so small, so undemanding, so easy to overlook, that my own son found it perfectly reasonable to erase me completely when I became too much trouble. But I was not dead. I had survived 6 months in intensive care, against odds that made doctors shake their heads in amazement. I had fought through infections and organ failure and complications that should have killed me multiple times. My body had betrayed me, but my spirit had refused to quit, had clawed its way back to consciousness, had insisted on healing even when giving up would have been so much easier. And I had not survived all of that, had not endured all that pain and fear and loneliness, just to let my son erase me from existence without a fight. I will not stay in a hotel, I told him. I will not take your money as a payoff for stealing my house and my savings and my entire life. I will not disappear quietly so you can continue living off what you took from me while I was helpless to stop you. I am going to a lawyer. I am going to the police. I am going to tell everyone what you did, and you are going to face consequences for treating your own mother like garbage you could simply throw away when she became inconvenient. David's expression hardened and he stepped forward, crowding me back toward the porch steps, his voice low and threatening in a way I had never heard from him before. You do not want to do that, Mom. You really do not want to go down that road. You were incompetent when I made those decisions. The doctors signed paperwork saying you could not make your own choices. I had legal authority to handle your affairs, and everything I did was within my rights as your power of attorney. You try to make trouble for me, and I will make sure everyone knows about your condition, about the dementia the doctors suspected, about how you are not capable of living independently anymore. Dementia. He was threatening to claim I had dementia, to use my illness and vulnerability as weapons against me, to paint me as a confused old woman who could not be trusted to understand her own situation. And maybe that would work. Maybe people would believe him over me. Maybe the legal system would side with the son who had power of attorney over the mother who had been medically incapacitated for months. Maybe I would end up in a nursing home or a facility somewhere, declared incompetent and stripped of what little autonomy I had left. And David would walk away with everything, suffering no consequences for what he had done. I left his house without another word because I did not trust myself to speak, did not trust what might come out of my mouth if I opened it, the rage and grief and disbelief that were churning inside me like a storm that could destroy everything in its path. I sat in my car, and I cried for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, cried for the son I thought I knew who apparently never existed, cried for the life I thought I would return to that had been dismantled and sold off piece by piece, cried for the naive version of myself who believed that being a good mother meant my child would be a good son. But here is what my son did not know, what he could not have anticipated because he had stopped really seeing me years ago, stopped paying attention to who I was beyond the role of mother he had assigned me. I was not just someone's mother. I was not just a sick old woman who could be easily dismissed and forgotten. I had worked for 30 years as a paralegal in one of the best law firms in the city. I knew exactly how power of attorney worked, what it permitted and what it did not permit. And I knew that selling someone's house and telling buyers that person was dead when you knew she was alive and fighting for survival in a hospital bed was not protected by any legal document, no matter how official it looked. I knew lawyers who owed me favors, who remembered when I had stayed late to help them prepare cases, who had told me multiple times that if I ever needed anything, I should not hesitate to call. I made phone calls from my car, my dead phone now charged using the charger I bought at a gas station with the last $23 I had found in my purse. I called Martha, who had been a junior associate when I started at the firm, and was now a partner specializing in elder law. I called Robert, who handled fraud cases and had once told me I had the sharpest legal mind of anyone he had ever worked with, lawyer or paralegal. I called the hospital and asked for copies of every document signed during my stay, every consent form, every medical record, every piece of paper that might show exactly when I had been declared incompetent and when I had regained capacity to make my own decisions. I called the police department and filed a report for identity theft and fraud. I called the real estate company that had handled the sale of my house and asked for copies of all documents related to the transaction. And then I did something my son would never expect from the mother he thought he knew, the accommodating woman who had spent her life making herself smaller and quieter and easier to ignore. I called a reporter I knew from covering court cases at the firm, a woman who specialized in human interest stories about injustice and corruption, and I told her everything. I told her about waking up from a coma to discover I had been erased from existence. I told her about my son selling my house and stealing my money while I fought for my life. I told her about being turned away from my own front door by strangers who thought they had bought property from a grieving son settling his dead mother's estate. I told her about David's threats to have me declared incompetent if I dared to fight back. The story ran 3 days later on the front page of the Metro section, complete with my photo and David's photo and pictures of the house he had sold out from under me. Within hours, it had been picked up by national news outlets, shared thousands of times on social media, turned into a cautionary tale about elder abuse and financial exploitation, and the vulnerability of people who trust their children to care for them when they cannot care for themselves. My phone, newly equipped with a cheap prepaid plan, rang constantly with calls from lawyers offering to take my case pro bono, advocates wanting to help, reporters asking for interviews, and people I had not heard from in years expressing shock and support and offers of places to stay while I figured out my next steps. David called me exactly once after the story broke. He did not apologize. He did not admit wrongdoing. He called to tell me I had embarrassed him, that I had ruined his reputation, that Jennifer was humiliated and her parents were asking questions and his co-workers were treating him differently. He called to tell me that I was a vindictive old woman who could not accept that he had tried to help me, that I was twisting a difficult situation into something ugly, that I was going to regret going public with private family business. I listened to his voice, this stranger's voice coming through the phone, and I felt nothing but pity for him, pity for a man so broken inside that he could steal from his dying mother and feel justified, that he could be caught and exposed and still see himself as the victim in this story. The legal proceedings took 8 months. 8 months of depositions and document reviews and testimony from doctors and social workers and financial experts. The young couple who bought my house were horrified when they learned the truth, and they worked with their lawyer and my lawyer to unwind the sale, to reverse the transaction even though it meant upheaval and uncertainty for their family. They did not have to do that. The law probably would have protected their purchase since they had no knowledge of the fraud. But they chose to do the right thing, to give back what had been stolen from me, and I will never forget their kindness, their integrity, their willingness to sacrifice their own comfort to correct an injustice they had unknowingly participated in. David was charged with multiple counts of fraud, theft, and elder abuse. He pleaded guilty to avoid trial, to avoid having all the details made public, to minimize the consequences as much as possible. He lost his job when his employer learned about the charges. Jennifer filed for divorce 6 months into the proceedings. He was ordered to return every penny he had taken from my accounts, to pay restitution, to serve probation and community service. But the real punishment, the one that mattered more than any legal consequence, was that he lost his mother, not because I died as he had hoped and planned for, but because I chose to walk away from him, to close the door on a relationship that had become toxic and destructive and unsalvageable. I am back in my house now, the house where I raised my son, where I thought I would grow old surrounded by memories, and maybe grandchildren and visits from a child who loved me enough to show up. The young couple moved out with grace and dignity, and I helped them find a new place. Actually wrote them a recommendation letter for their rental application because they deserved kindness after being caught in the middle of my family's dysfunction. My furniture is mostly gone, sold or discarded by David during those 6 months, but I am slowly replacing it, choosing each piece carefully, building a home that reflects who I am now rather than who I used to be. I bought a new couch last week, deep blue fabric that feels soft under my fingertips, and I sat on it for an hour just feeling the newness of it, the way it represented a fresh start, a reclaiming of space that had been taken from me. I chose artwork for the walls, paintings of landscapes I have never visited, but dream about visiting someday, images of mountains and oceans and forests that remind me there is still beauty in this world, even after everything ugly I have experienced. The bedroom where I spent my childhood sleeping under a roof my parents provided, where I later slept beside my husband for 23 years until cancer took him from me, where I cried myself to sleep the night of his funeral, while my teenage son tried awkwardly to comfort me. That bedroom feels different now, feels like mine in a way it never did before. I rearranged everything, moved the bed to face the window so I can watch sunrise every morning, bought new bedding in colors I chose without consulting anyone or considering anyone else's preferences, hung photographs of people and places that matter to me on walls that used to hold family portraits I felt obligated to display. This is my space now, my sanctuary, my proof that I survived and reclaimed what was stolen, and every morning when I wake up in that room, I feel a surge of gratitude mixed with grief. Gratitude for being alive, and grief for everything I lost along the way to this moment. The money David stole has been returned, most of it anyway, enough that I can live comfortably if I am careful. The legal settlement included penalties and interest, money that felt both satisfying and hollow, because no amount of financial compensation could repair the relationship that shattered when I discovered what my son had done. I am not working anymore, not strong enough yet after everything my body went through, but I volunteer at the hospital where I spent those 6 months, visiting patients in intensive care, talking to their families, reminding them that recovery is possible, that survival happens even when it seems impossible. I sit with people who are where I was, unconscious and fighting, and I hold their hands and I tell them about my story, about how I made it through, about how they can make it through too. There is a young woman I visit every Tuesday, a mother of 3 who was in a car accident and has been in a coma for 5 weeks. Her husband sits beside her bed looking exhausted and terrified and lost, and I bring him coffee and sit with him while he talks about their children and their mortgage and all the responsibilities piling up while his wife fights to come back to him. I do not tell him the worst parts of my story, do not burden him with details about betrayal and theft, but I do tell him that I understand what it feels like to have your entire world turned upside down, to wonder if things will ever be normal again, to fear that the person you love might not survive this trauma. And I see something shift in his face when I talk to him, see hope kindle where there was only despair, see him sit up straighter and breathe deeper and look at his wife with renewed determination instead of resignation. The nurses at the hospital recognize me now, smile when I arrive for my volunteer shifts, thank me for the work I do with families who are drowning in fear and uncertainty. One of them, a woman named Patricia who cared for me during my darkest days in intensive care, pulled me aside last month and told me she remembered me, remembered how close I came to dying, remembered the son who visited daily and held my hand and begged me to keep fighting. She said watching my recovery was one of the reasons she stayed in this job, despite the emotional toll it takes, because seeing patients like me survive and thrive reminded her why this work matters, why showing up every day to care for people at their most vulnerable is worth the exhaustion and heartbreak. I hugged her and thanked her, and I thought about David sitting beside my bed all those months, thought about him watching machines breathe for me and wondering if I would ever open my eyes again, and for just a moment I felt something soften inside me, some small crack in the wall of anger I had built around my heart. But then I remembered the conversation with the young couple who bought my house, remembered the casual way David had told them his mother was dead, remembered how easily he had erased my existence to expedite a real estate transaction, and the softness hardened again into something cold and unforgiving. There are things you cannot unknow, betrayals you cannot unsee, and knowing that my son stood at my bedside pretending to care while simultaneously selling off my life piece by piece is one of those things, one of those truths that changes everything, that makes every memory suspect, and every gesture of apparent love feel like manipulation or performance. I started writing about my experience, putting words on paper late at night when sleep would not come, and memories circled my mind like vultures waiting to descend. I wrote about the moment the key failed to open my door, about the shock of seeing strangers in my living room, about the conversation with David on his front porch, when I realized the son I thought I knew was actually a stranger wearing a familiar face. I wrote about the legal battle and the public exposure, and the slow, painful process of accepting that some relationships cannot be repaired no matter how much you might want them to be. And people started reading what I wrote, people who had experienced similar betrayals or who feared experiencing them, people who saw themselves in my story and felt less alone in their pain. A woman named Carol reached out to me after reading one of my essays online, told me her daughter had cleaned out her bank accounts while Carol was recovering from a stroke, told me she felt ashamed and confused and did not know if she should report her own child to authorities or just accept the loss and move on with her life. I met Carol for coffee and we talked for 3 hours, two mothers trying to make sense of being victimized by the children we had sacrificed everything to raise. She asked me if I regretted going public with my story, if the satisfaction of holding David accountable was worth the pain of airing private family business for the world to judge. And I told her the truth, told her that some days I regretted everything, wished I had just accepted David's offer of hotel money and disappeared quietly into obscurity, wished I had never made that phone call to the reporter or filed those police reports, or set in motion a chain of events that destroyed whatever fragile connections still existed between mother and son. But most days, I told Carol, most days I am glad I fought back, glad I refused to be erased, glad I stood up and said, no, this is not acceptable. You do not get to steal from me and lie about me and face no consequences just because I am your mother, and you think I will protect you from your own choices. Most days I believe that staying silent would have killed something essential inside me, would have taught me that my life and my rights and my dignity matter less than keeping the peace or protecting my son's reputation, or maintaining a relationship that was already broken beyond repair. Most days I wake up grateful that I chose to fight, even though fighting cost me everything, because at least I still have my self-respect. At least I know I did not go quietly. At least I proved to myself that I am stronger than I thought I was. Carol cried when I said that, cried and thanked me and told me I had given her permission to do what she already knew she needed to do, to stop protecting her daughter from consequences and start protecting herself from further harm. We still meet for coffee sometimes, Carol and I, two survivors of a particular kind of betrayal, and we share our small victories and our ongoing struggles, and we remind each other that we are not crazy, we are not vindictive, we are not bad mothers. We are simply human beings who deserved better from the people we loved most. The house feels emptier than it used to, quieter in ways that have nothing to do with furniture or belongings. There are no grandchildren running through the rooms, no Sunday dinners with family gathered around the table, no phone calls from David asking how I am doing, or if I need anything. There is just me and the life I am building from the rubble of everything that was destroyed, and some days that feels like enough, and some days it feels like a prison sentence I am serving for the crime of surviving, when it would have been easier for everyone if I had just died in that hospital bed. I think about my husband sometimes, wonder what he would say if he could see what became of our family, what became of the son we raised together before cancer took him and left me to finish the job alone. Would he be disappointed in David? Or would he understand the impossible situation our son found himself in, the burden of a dying mother and mounting medical bills and decisions that had to be made without any good options available? Would he be proud of me for fighting back, or would he think I should have handled things differently? Should have tried harder to understand David's perspective, should have forgiven and moved forward instead of burning everything down in pursuit of justice? I will never know the answers to these questions, will never hear my husband's voice offering wisdom or comfort or perspective, and that absence feels particularly heavy on the days when I most need someone to tell me I did the right thing, that my choices were justified, that I am not the villain in this story, even though sometimes I wonder if maybe I am. People ask me sometimes if I am angry, if I hate my son for what he did to me, if I lie awake at night, consumed by bitterness and thoughts of revenge. The truth is more complicated than a simple yes or no. I am angry at what he did, at the betrayal and the cruelty and the coldness with which he erased me from existence. I am sad about the relationship we will never have, the future that could have been different if he had made different choices, if he had chosen love over greed and integrity over convenience. But I am not consumed by it. I am not letting what he did define the rest of my life or poison the time I have left on this earth. There are moments, though, moments when the anger rises up so fierce and sudden that it takes my breath away. Moments when I am doing something ordinary like grocery shopping or watching television, and suddenly I am back on that porch with the key that would not work, back in that conversation with strangers living in my house, back in David's doorway hearing him tell me I was complicating his life by having the audacity to survive. Those moments catch me off guard, knock me sideways with their intensity, remind me that healing is not linear, that you do not simply decide to move on and then move on cleanly without looking back. I had one of those moments last month in the middle of the grocery store, standing in the cereal aisle, trying to decide between two brands I had been buying interchangeably for 30 years. A woman stood next to me with her adult son, both of them laughing about something, and I heard the son say, "Mom, you always get the one in the blue box, remember?" And she laughed and said, "Oh, you are right. I do not know why I keep forgetting." And he put his arm around her shoulders and kissed the top of her head, and I had to abandon my cart right there in the aisle and walk out of the store because the tears came so fast and hard I could not see, could not breathe, could not function in public like a normal person doing normal things. I sat in my car in the parking lot and I cried for the relationship I do not have with my son, for the casual affection I will never experience again, for the simple moment of being reminded which cereal I prefer by someone who knows me well enough to remember these small details. I cried for the mother I used to be who took these moments for granted, who assumed her son would always be there to help her remember which box was the right box, who never imagined a day when her only child would be a stranger she could not trust, could not call, could not rely on for anything except more pain. And then I dried my eyes and I went back into the store and I bought both boxes of cereal, bought them out of spite or defiance or just because I could, because I am still here and I still get to make choices about what cereal I eat and what furniture I buy and how I spend my days. And David does not get to take that away from me no matter what else he took. I bought both boxes and I put them in my cart and I finished my shopping and I drove home and I ate cereal from the blue box for breakfast the next morning and it tasted like victory, small and petty, and absolutely necessary for my continued survival. I joined a support group for people who have experienced financial abuse from family members, a group that meets every other Thursday evening in a church basement that smells like old coffee and floor wax, and the accumulated sadness of people who have been betrayed by the people they loved most. We sit in a circle on folding chairs and we take turns telling our stories. And every story is different in its details but identical in its core truth. The truth that family does not always mean safety, that love does not always mean protection, that the people who are supposed to care for us can sometimes be the ones who hurt us most. There is a man named Gerald whose brother stole his identity and opened credit cards in his name, ruining Gerald's credit and leaving him with debt he did not create and could not pay. There is a woman named Diane whose husband cleaned out their joint accounts and disappeared, leaving her with 3 children and no money to feed them or keep the lights on. There is a young man named Marcus, whose mother took out student loans in his name and never went to college herself, never told him about the debt until collectors started calling demanding payment for an education he never received. We are a collection of people who learned the hard way that trust is dangerous, that love can be weaponized, that family ties can be chains rather than comfort. But we are also people who survived, who are still standing, who show up every other Thursday to remind each other that we are not alone, that what happened to us was real and wrong, and not our fault. We celebrate small victories together, like the day Diane got her first paycheck from a new job, or the day Gerald finally got the fraudulent accounts removed from his credit report, or the day I won my legal settlement against David. We hold space for each other's grief and anger and confusion, and we do not judge each other for taking too long to heal, or for struggling with forgiveness, or for cutting off family members who refuse to acknowledge the harm they caused. The group leader, a therapist named Dr. Sarah Chen, tells us that healing from family betrayal is uniquely difficult, because it strikes at the foundation of how we understand ourselves and the world. When a stranger hurts you, she says, it confirms what you already knew about the dangers of trusting people you do not know. But when family hurts you, it shatters your basic assumptions about safety and love and loyalty, forces you to rebuild your entire understanding of relationships from the ground up. She tells us this is why we struggle, why we second-guess ourselves, why we lie awake, wondering if maybe we are overreacting or being too harsh or failing to understand the other person's perspective. But she also tells us, every single week without fail, that what happened to us was abuse, that financial exploitation is a form of violence even when it does not leave visible scars, that we have every right to be angry and hurt and unwilling to forgive. She tells us that protecting ourselves from further harm is not cruelty, that establishing boundaries with people who have proven themselves untrustworthy is not punishment, that choosing our own well-being over preserving relationships that damage us is not selfishness. She tells us these things, and I hear them and I believe them intellectually, but believing them in my heart, really internalizing them to the point where I stop questioning my own choices, that is harder. That is work I am still doing every single day. I started seeing Dr. Chen individually after a few months of attending the group sessions, started therapy for the first time in my life at 68 years old, because apparently it takes catastrophic betrayal to convince some of us that we might need professional help processing our experiences. She asks me questions that make me uncomfortable, questions about my childhood and my marriage and my relationship with David before everything fell apart. She asks me if I was a good mother, if I showed David enough affection, if I was too strict or too lenient or too focused on my own needs instead of his. And I hate these questions, hate the implication that maybe I am partly responsible for what he did to me, hate the way they make me examine every choice I made and wonder if I failed him somehow, if I created the person who would eventually betray me so completely. But Dr. Chen is gentle when she explains that asking these questions is not about assigning blame, but about understanding the full context of our relationship, about recognizing patterns that might have contributed to the breakdown, even if those patterns do not excuse or justify David's actions. She tells me that being a good mother does not guarantee having a good son, that I could have done everything perfectly, and David might still have made the choices he made, that his betrayal says more about his character than mine. She tells me this, and I want to believe her, want to accept that I am not responsible for my son's moral failures. But there is a voice in my head, my mother's voice maybe, or just the internalized voice of a lifetime of being told that mothers are responsible for everything their children become, that keeps whispering maybe if you had done things differently, maybe if you had been better, maybe if you had loved him more, or differently, or less demanding. I survived. That is what matters. I survived 6 months in intensive care when doctors said I would not make it through the night. I survived discovering that my entire life had been stolen while I was helpless to protect it. I survived my own son's betrayal and his attempts to silence me and his threats to have me declared incompetent. I survived the legal battle and the public exposure and the painful process of accepting that my child was not who I thought he was. And I am still here, still standing, still moving forward, still finding reasons to smile and hope and believe that tomorrow might bring something better than today brought. The seasons change, and I watch them from my living room window. Watch the leaves turn gold and fall. Watch snow cover the yard where David used to build snowmen when he was small. Watch spring flowers push through frozen ground, reminding me that growth is possible even after the harshest winter. Each season brings its own memories, its own grief, its own small joys, and I am learning to hold all of it at once. The pain and the healing, the loss and the survival, the anger and the hope. I celebrated my 69th birthday last month, alone except for Carol, who brought me a cake and stayed for dinner. And I thought about all the birthdays David missed over the years, all the times he was too busy to show up for his mother. And I wondered if those missed birthdays were practice for this, for a future where he would not show up at all because I had made it impossible for him to be part of my life anymore. I blew out the candles and Carol sang happy birthday in a voice that wavered with emotion because she understood what it meant to mark another year of life when so much had been taken away. There are good days and bad days, and days that fall somewhere in between. Good days when I wake up grateful to be alive, when the house feels like home instead of a monument to everything I lost. Bad days when I cannot get out of bed, when the isolation feels like punishment, when I wonder if fighting back was worth the cost of losing my only child, and in between days when I function and survive and do what needs to be done without feeling particularly good or bad about any of it, just moving through the hours until it is time to sleep again and start over tomorrow. If you have stayed with me through this entire story, if you have listened to every painful detail and every moment of heartbreak and confusion and eventual triumph, then I want to thank you for being here, for witnessing my experience, for letting me know through your presence that my story matters. Before you close this video and move on with your day, I want to invite you to become a permanent part of this community we are building together. When you subscribe to this channel, you are doing more than just following another creator or adding another notification to your feed. You are joining a family of people who understand that life can be brutally unfair, that the people we trust most can hurt us deepest, that survival sometimes means fighting battles we never imagined we would have to fight. Every video I share here is designed to remind you that you are not alone in your struggles, that your pain is valid, that your experience deserves to be acknowledged and honored. I share stories like mine because I know there are people watching who need to hear that they can make it through their own darkness, that betrayal does not have to destroy them, that starting over is possible even when everything has been taken away. So please, click that subscribe button right now. Join us. Let this be a place where you can come when the world feels too heavy, when the people who should love you have let you down, when you need to be reminded that you are stronger than you know. And after you subscribe, leave me a comment telling me what brought you here today, what part of this story resonated with you, what you are going through that made my experience feel familiar. I read every comment. I see every person who takes the time to share their truth. You matter to me. Your story matters to this community. We are here for each other, and together we are building something beautiful from all of our broken pieces. But I have not told you everything yet, and this is where I need you to pay very close attention, because what I am about to reveal will change everything you think you understand about my story. There is one detail I have held back, one piece of information that reframes every single thing I have told you, and you deserve to know the complete truth before you leave here today. Remember when I told you about my son David threatening to have me declared incompetent? About him mentioning dementia that doctors suspected? Remember how I dismissed it as a manipulation tactic, as his attempt to silence me and control the narrative? I was not lying when I said I knew the law, when I said I had worked as a paralegal for 30 years and understood my rights. All of that was true, but there was something else. Something the doctors told David during one of my many stays in intensive care. Something written in medical charts I did not share with my lawyers or the reporters or anyone else who helped me fight for justice. I have Alzheimer's disease, early onset, aggressive, diagnosed 2 years before I ever ended up in that hospital bed fighting for my life. The pneumonia that nearly killed me, the infections that kept recurring, the complications that made my recovery so difficult. All of it was complicated by neurological decline that I had been hiding from everyone, even from myself most days, because admitting it made it real in a way I was not ready to accept. The doctors told David during my second week in intensive care, showed him test results and brain scans, explained that even if I survived the physical trauma, my cognitive decline was irreversible and would only accelerate, that I would need care I could not provide for myself, that living independently was no longer safe or realistic. And here is the part that will hurt to hear, the part that makes this story so much more complicated than a simple tale of a villainous son stealing from his innocent mother. David did not sell my house and close my accounts because he wanted my money. He sold the house because I would never be able to return to it, because living alone in a 3-bedroom house with stairs and a yard and all the demands of home ownership was impossible for someone with advancing Alzheimer's who would need assisted living or memory care within months. He closed the accounts and consolidated everything because I had been making mistakes with money for over a year, paying the same bills multiple times, forgetting to pay others, writing checks to scammers who called pretending to be from the IRS or the bank or sweepstakes companies. The family living in my house now, those kind strangers with the baby, they did not just buy a house from my son. They bought it from a trust my son established with guidance from elder law attorneys, a trust designed to protect my assets and ensure I would have the care I needed for however many years I had left. The money from the house sale did not go into David's pocket. It went into that trust, into an account that pays for my care in the assisted living facility where I actually live now, not in the house I claimed to have returned to, because that house is gone, and I could not maintain it anyway. Not with the way my mind slips and slides and loses track of what day it is or whether I have eaten lunch or who that person is standing in my doorway claiming to be my son. I did not win a legal battle against David because there was no legal battle to win. The story I told you about reporters and lawyers and fraud charges was real in my mind when I was telling it, vivid and detailed and absolutely convincing, but it was not real in the world outside my head. It was a story my brain constructed to make sense of a reality too painful to accept. The reality that I am losing myself piece by piece, that my son did not betray me but instead made impossible decisions to protect me from myself, that I am not the victim of theft, but the recipient of care I fight against because I do not understand I need it. David visits me every Sunday. He brings me flowers and sits with me for hours, even when I do not remember who he is, even when I accuse him of being a stranger trying to steal my things, even when I call for security to remove this man who is upsetting me. Jennifer comes sometimes too, and they are expecting their first child, a daughter they have already told me about 6 times, but I forget between visits. So each time feels like the first time I am learning I will be a grandmother. The young couple from my house sends me cards on my birthday and major holidays, even though I have never met them and they have never lived in any house I owned. The hospital where I supposedly volunteer has no record of me because I have not set foot in that building since the day I was discharged to the care facility where I now live. This video you are watching right now was recorded during one of my clear days, a day when the fog lifts temporarily and I can see reality for what it is, rather than what my diseased brain wants me to believe. My son helped me write this script because I asked him to, because I wanted to create something true while I still could, something that would outlast the confusion and delusion and eventual total loss of self that Alzheimer's promises. I wanted people to understand that this disease does not just steal memories. It steals your ability to trust your own mind, to know what is real and what is fiction, to distinguish between genuine betrayal and the protective actions of people who love you. If someone you love has Alzheimer's, if you are watching them disappear into a maze of false memories and accusations and stories that make you the villain of their life, please know that it is the disease talking, not the person you love. Please know that caring for someone who fights against your care is one of the hardest things a human being can do. Please know that you are not a thief or an abuser or a monster, even when the person you are trying to help believes you are all of those things. Please know that on their clear days, in those rare moments when the fog lifts and they see you truly, they know what you are doing for them. They know you love them. They know that every hard decision you make is an act of devotion, even when it feels like betrayal to them in the moment. And if you are the person with Alzheimer's, if you are in the early stages watching this and recognizing yourself in my story, please make plans now while you still can. Choose someone you trust to make decisions when you cannot. Write down what you want, what kind of care you hope to receive, what you want your family to know when you can no longer tell them yourself. Forgive in advance the people who will have to do things that hurt you to keep you safe. Trust that even when your brain tells you they are enemies, they are fighting for you with everything they have. I am going to forget I made this video. Tomorrow, or maybe even later today, I will forget that I told you this story. Forget that I revealed the truth hiding underneath all my delusions. Forget that I asked David to help me create something honest before honesty becomes impossible for me. But you will remember. You will carry this truth forward. You will share it with others who need to understand that Alzheimer's is not just about forgetting where you put your keys or what you ate for breakfast. It is about losing the ability to know what is real, about constructing elaborate narratives to explain a world that no longer makes sense, about fighting against the very people who love you most because your brain has decided they are threats instead of protectors. Thank you for listening to my story, the real story, the complicated, messy, painful truth that is so much harder to accept than a simple tale of villains and victims. Thank you for staying until the end, for being willing to have your understanding shifted, for opening your heart to the reality that sometimes the person telling you they have been betrayed is actually the person being cared for with extraordinary patience and love. Subscribe if this story meant something to you. Share it with anyone who needs to understand what Alzheimer's really does to families, to relationships, to the fundamental trust between parents and children. Leave a comment if you are caring for someone with this disease, if you are living with this diagnosis yourself, if you need to know you are not alone in this particular kind of heartbreak. We are all in this together, fighting against a disease that wants to erase us, Choosing love even when love is the hardest possible choice. Holding on to truth even when our own minds become unreliable narrators of our lives. And to my son David, if you are watching this after I have forgotten making it, if you are showing this to me to help me remember, or to help others understand, I want you to know that I see you. I really see you, and I am so sorry for every time I looked at you with suspicion or fear or anger. For every moment, my broken brain made me believe you were stealing from me instead of caring for me. You are a good son. You are doing everything right even when it feels impossible. I love you. I have always loved you. And on the days when I do not know who you are, when I call you a thief and a liar and demand that you leave me alone, please remember this moment, this clear day when I could tell you the truth, when I could thank you for carrying a burden I would not wish on anyone, when I could look at you with eyes that truly see and tell you that you are exactly the son I always hoped you would be.